Treat. This is the Fulbright Research Opportunities Panel. Thank you to Karen Brown, your Assistant Vice President for International Scholarship, for inviting me to this forum to share international and collaborative research support for scholars. I'm delighted to be here with you and with three of your University of Minnesota Twin Cities colleagues who have helped Fulbright U.S. Scholar Grants for research. So Elizabeth Lightfoot is here, a professor who is the director of the doctoral program in social work. Jennifer Cavender-Bares in the School of Biological Sciences, and Cawo, Abdi, an assistant professor in sociology. So they're going to bring things alive for you here and talk about what it was really like to apply and then what it was like in country. I'm Debra, Egan. I'm the Director of Scholar Academic Partnerships at the Council for International Exchange of Scholars in Washington. So I came out for the day. This is a perfect topic for Fulbright. We're focusing on scholars today, on faculty. With Fulbright, you often think about the student grants, and that's a big part of the program that's managed by our office in New York. In Washington, we work with you, the faculty and administrators, full-time. This is a big program. Anybody have a sense of the size of it? What would be your guess on the number of grants in a year? Toss out a guess. Any of you guys know? It's over 800 grants a year. Yeah. And about 25% of those are for research, and another almost 40% are for combined teaching and research. So research, plays an important part in the majority of the grants that are offered. So the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs is the sponsor of the Fulbright program. So that means that it's our money, it's taxpayer money at work to fund the program. And our office is an education not-for-profit, and we have been assisting the State Department to administer the program since it wasn't first funded by the Congress in the late 1940s. So what we particularly do is work with you as prospective applicants and with the merit review of applications in the United States. And then they go off to the host countries for consideration, to the State Department for budgeting, and to the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board for a final selection. So we are available to you for your questions. So if we can start off, if you wouldn't all mind introducing yourself, just let us know your name and your department, and if there's something particular you're interested in, if you're interested in a country, or if you got a question about the program, so that this will be relevant for you. Okay. Maybe we start with you?
Sure. My name is Teddy Cotter, and I'm from the School of Nursing, and I don't really have a particular interest other than to learn more.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ellen Engstad from the University Libraries, and I work with Migration and Social Services Special Collections.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Tyler, a student in the School of Social Work and the School of Public Health. This is actually my advisor. And,
I didn't tell him.
Yeah, I'm interested in potential future facilities.
Good. Yes.
I'm John Bryans. I work for the University of Minnesota Extension, and we're working in Morocco and in Kenya.
Morocco, Kenya, thank you. One more, yes, sir.
Okay. Robin Wright from the College of Biological Sciences.
Thank you.
Pam Jacobson from the College of Pharmacy.
Good afternoon, Mike Harrington from CIES, Environmental Science, and I served on some of the interview committees for Fulbright program here at the University of Minnesota.
Okay, is that for students?
For Asia and Scandinavia.
For faculty or for students?
Aspect.
Faculty, so looking at applications here or coming to our office?
And undergraduate both. So the interview process is primarily for undergrad and grads.
Okay, the student grants. Thank you. Okay, so we have a resource on student grants. Thank you.
I'm
Please.
Phyllis Messenger in the Institute for Advanced Study, and I'm the grants coordinator, and so I often have the opportunity to work with faculty who are interested in.
Oh, fantastic. So this is your resource that during the year, right? As people are putting
I try to be.
drafts together. Thank you for coming. Okay, yes.
I'm Anna Berlovsky, and I'm the research for the College of Liberal Arts, grants coordinator as well.
Oh, okay.
Great, and I'm Ellen Freeman, I'm the Assistant Director for Research in the College of Education and Human Development, so same idea.
So all three of you, good, excellent.
I'm Denny Falk, in social work up at the University of Minnesota in Duluth, and I'm interested in promoting Fulbright opportunities on our campus in my role as a faculty fellow for internationalization.
Very good, thank you. Okay. Just introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Shannon Fisher. I finished my law degree in May, and I'm going to finish my MPH very soon. Here to hear a little bit about doing some research in the future, potentially.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, also from UMD,
Yes.
the Department of Sociology and Ecology.
Welcome. Welcome.
I'm Lauren Ports. I'm with the GPS Alliance, which is the university's Central Global Programs Office. But I'm actually listed on our website as one of the contacts for the Scholar Program. And I put together the very minimum of the resources that are available there. But I'm here because it is something that I think we do very well, that the University of Minnesota campus, Twin Cities campus does very well, but I'm always interested in understanding how we might do better.
Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Cawo, and I'm with the Center for Spirituality and Healing.
Great. Well, you really are very fortunate to have all these resources on campus, so do access them, and thank you for being part of this today so people can be in touch with you throughout the year. So we talked a little about the size of the program being over 800 grants. Keep in mind that every year there are that many scholars coming from abroad to the United States as well, and they're another source for you. So this is an exchange program in both directions. Annual opportunity to apply. When is the deadline?
August 1st.
August 1st? Yes, thank you. And that's for the following academic year. Tools and resources are on the Fulbright Scholar Program website, CIES.org. Familiar with the site, familiar with the catalog. Please use the catalog. Okay? We're going to dive into the catalog as your first tool. Now, how to get to the catalog? Programs, U.S. Scholars, Core. The catalog, when I started 16 years ago, was a hard copy book that we mailed by the tens of thousands and carted out to conferences. And I think that all ended truly when airlines started imposing baggage fees. People stopped picking up big catalogs at the network shuttles. So here it is. Now it's a search tool. And I want you to be comfortable with it. You can search by world region, by country, by discipline. You can also do some advanced searches. I want you to know you can search Flex Awards, and we're going to explain what those are, postdoctoral and early career awards, and I invite you to go down to the advanced search because that's where you can search by activity. It'll let us do that. There we go. When you search by activity, you can look for the research awards and see how you have a teaching research category. Some of your colleagues will speak about that, and others are straight research. I want to open the research category for you just so you can see your options. Let me come back. See if I can get it to scroll down. Yep, okay. Now we are looking at the 2015-2016 catalog. So those applications already came in August 1st, right? And this catalog will be reposted on the website in February of 2015 for the 2016-17 year. And most of these awards will be there. So this is your reference tool right now. You don't have to wait till next February. See, when we did that search, it pulled up 224 awards that all are for research. So you have lots of options. This is out of over 500 awards that are in the catalog in a given year. And you're going to find a real variety of treasures in here. First thing you're going to find are regional awards. You can see that up top. That means that you can conduct your research in more than one location on your one research visit. So the African Regional Research Awards would allow you to do work in 1, 2, or 3 countries over a period of 3 to 9 months. And as you scroll down this long list, you're going to find the other regional opportunities would be European Union affairs. Think about 2 countries in the European Union. You can do research in Austria and Hungary, in addition to the European Union Affairs Award. There is a regional award in the Middle East and North Africa, one in South and Central Asia, and a new one in East Asia and the Pacific called the Cross Straits Award. And what do you think that's for? That would be the strait between Taiwan and China. So you're able to do work in both places and short-term visit over in Hong Kong as well, if that's relevant to your research. And that's been quite popular. It's also possible to do research work in Canada and Mexico on the same grant. And with your proximity to Canada here in Minnesota, I wanted to bring that to your attention. Any of the issues that North America is grappling with, whether it's pharmaceuticals or environment or whatever topic you want to take up, you can think about, how to collect data in more than one place. So one thing to think about in terms of research. Then you will see country awards listed. And some of them say all disciplines, and others are more specific, like science and technology, or education, social sciences, humanities. So when it's all said and done, out of those 800 grants a year, about half of the grants come from all disciplines awards. Naturally, they would draw a large variety of scholars because they're so open. An award that's only in electrical engineering, is only going to draw that specialization. So if you were searching the catalog by discipline and something didn't come up specifically in your field, like library science is going to be a small list, don't despair. Go to the all disciplines because there's so many opportunities there. And then it's your job as the applicant to say, well, where is what I'm doing be of interest to come up with the host institution? All right. Someone like to pick a country? We'll open an award just for how to use this tool. South Africa? Okay, sure. Easy to see. Now, this is an example of a country where the awards are open in all fields. They just split them into 2 awards just to give more visibility to show that they were interested both in the sciences and technology and in other fields. So the awards are going to read similarly. And this is a good example because it's open in teaching research, or research. So you can propose, any combination and apply to the same award. And also because it has multiple grants to offer, you can see they plan to offer about 10 grants from this award. And it gives you flexibility in length of 6 to 11 months. And it lets you know where you can affiliate. So any of the 23 higher education institutions in their structure. But what I want to draw your attention to is a new feature in research awards, which is called Flex. Can you see where that appears? So for every award now, it'll tell you yes or no on Flex. And what does Flex mean? Flex means that the program has listened to scholars over many years say, I'd like to apply, but I can't be away for a semester or a year. What do you have for me? This is what's been introduced into the awards. You can propose to conduct your research over a 2-year period, or for some countries 3 years, with shorter grant segments. So your research could be 1 month in the coming year, 3 months in the following year. The total grant could be 4 to 6 months. So this has been very appealing to some scholars and to their department chairs to allow that longer collaboration, or maybe you're going and you're looking at planting and harvest, or you're looking at pre and post elections, or there are all kinds of compelling reasons why more than one trip would facilitate the richness of the research, and this will fund both of the travels. So that's a new feature. The other thing to notice when looking through an actual award is that it will give you our staff contact information. So for every award, you can be in touch with us by phone or email. You can send us a CV, especially if you're thinking about maybe more than one country. Where am I a fit? You can be in touch with more than one of us. Okay, so those are some of the features to look for if it's a country award or regional, if it's flex or not. So in the South Africa example, you can apply for one research visit, that's fine. You don't have to apply for flex, but flex is an option within the research category. Does that make sense? And I'm going to go back here so you can see another award, because that was a nice general award that was broadly open, that gave you lots of options, right? Teaching research, or flex research. I'm going to take you, if I can, all the way down to the, you're going to have to close your eyes if this hurts your eyes, because I want to go all the way to Western Hemisphere, and these are in alphabetical order by world region. Europe's big. So when you get to Western Hemisphere, you're going to see a different kind of award for flex, and right in the title, it's going to say all disciplines flex. And that means that's all that award is for, because those countries don't otherwise have a research option. So it's a separate award. So we'll find you an example. Costa Rica, all disciplines flex. So when you open that award, it's not going to say teaching, research, or research. It's just going to say research, and it's just going to say the multi-visit kind of award. So those have all been newly introduced in the catalog. One more thing to share with you in the catalog that is new as of last week, so even your most experienced folks on campus may not have seen it yet. You are the first audience. The flyer was developed yesterday afternoon before I left, and it's on the table downstairs. It is postdoctoral research, and it is for an additional deadline, where's our doctoral student, of January 15th. So in addition to August 1, when there were postdoctoral awards in the catalog, this is another opportunity the State Department has committed to fund for 2015-16. It speeds up the notification process for students and early career scholars who may still be open to what their options would be for 2015-16. There are 10 awards in 7 locations, and I'm going to show you how to find those. So back out at the catalog search tool, that's where, the first time we went to the advanced search, remember? On the main search, you can look for the Flex Awards if you wanted to pull those out. Remember, we looked at the broad research category with over 200. If you just click on Flex, you'll get 91 options. So you'll get the portion of research awards that had Flex in the last catalog. If you go to postdoctoral and early career, and you only show the awards currently open to new applicants, you're going to get those 10 awards. So here they are. They're in Belgium, Brazil, Canada, European Union, France, Taiwan, and Korea. So the good news is that you don't have to have tenure to apply for Fulbright, and that there are some awards that are only open to postdocs, and they are here. That's first 5 years after PhD or terminal degree. Most of the other research awards will say open to all levels of scholars, including early career. So those also work as a postdoc opportunity, but these are only for that level. All right. 2 other tools on the website. There is a PowerPoint available on all the nuts and bolts of applying. We come and do campus workshops that are about an hour and a half in length, and that's the whole session, and I want you to hear from the grantees. So you can refer to the PowerPoint for those details. And those are on the home page. Remember, we went to programs, Instead of programs, you would go to on-campus, virtual toolkit, and open the first tool at the top, which is the PowerPoint. The next resource I'd like you to get familiar with is the Fulbright Scholar list from the homepage. And why do I say that? Because this is the directory of scholars who have a grant this year, the visiting scholars to the U.S. and the U.S. scholars going abroad, and it's got the directory of all these folks from the past several years who've been on grants. How would you use that? 2 ways. Visiting scholars who are here, you can invite to campus through the Outreach Lecturing Fund. And they can come and give talks here, and we'll cover their travel cost if they're coming from outside the local area. But that way, if you're trying to connect with an institution you don't already have contacts, that's a possible way to do it. Another way to use the list is look at the U.S. scholars who've gone to a country that you're interested in. Because if you're proposing research, a letter of invitation is either required or recommended in most cases. And if you don't already have contacts, that's one way to approach it. As I mentioned, you can contact our office. Other resources will be the Fulbright Commission or the U.S. Embassy in the host country. The award will often list their email if you have questions while you're applying. And your campus. You've got 4 resources in the room. And also think about where the University of Minnesota has MOUs or linkages or other partnerships and how you can leverage that with a Fulbright application. And then there's the question of what to cover in the application project statement. You have 5 pages. If it's teaching and research, you're going to split your space among both. But on the research end, you really want to focus on what, where, why, how. Methodology, feasibility, language, if that's an issue, you don't have to be fluent in language, but you need to discuss how you would get the work done. If you're interviewing, is someone translating? Are you working with a collaborator who is fluent? Are you working in archives? How you disseminate the work in the U.S. and in the host country, remembering that the research is collaborative and not extractive. And what difference will it make? And finally, why do you need to be there to do it? And that's an important one to remember, especially in the internet age. You'll attach a bibliography of up to 3 pages of works written by others on the topic. And those are really the basics. I want to turn it over at this point first to Liz, if I can, to talk, and each of them will let you know the country where they applied, the institution they went to, what kind of a grant it was, if it was research or teaching and research, when it was, and what's come out of it. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Okay? Wonderful. Please.
Do you want
Would you like to come up here, wherever you're comfortable?
Maybe you can see me better.
Okay.
Hey, Liz, thanks. So Debra was my staff person when I applied for my Fulbright, and so I actually contacted her when I was trying to make connections. I was a Fulbright scholar in 2008 in Namibia, which is in southern Africa, just northwest of South Africa, and I was 75% teaching, 25% research. I was there for 14 months. I actually got an extension, and I used every last day of my sabbatical. I gave my final and left the next morning, and I stayed until the day before my next class. And I was calendar year, because they do calendar years down there. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I ended up in Namibia, what my application process was like, and then what I did there and what I've been doing since. And I'd say it was a really valuable experience for me, and I'm very grateful to the Fulbright program for existing and for choosing me. So I'm in the School of Social Work, and my area of interest is mainly in disability policy and services. My background's in comparative political science, and I had done some international work and some international research while I was a doctoral student, actually while I was a master's student. But then I came here to the University of Minnesota, and I had 3 babies while I was on the tenure track, and I really couldn't see getting pretty much out of my house, much less internationally, more than a week or 2 while I was on the tenure track. But as I was getting closer to tenure, I was thinking, okay, now is the time. And I got one of those hard copy books, which they still had back then, the year before, and I studied it, like Debra was saying. I studied and looked at what the opportunities were. I looked online and looked at what people had done. Social work is pretty limited what the opportunities were, but I was really happy about the all disciplines option because that really did open it up. Unlike some folks, I was looking for a place to go where I could broaden my experiences rather than a place that I already had ongoing collaborations. And the Fulbright's one of the few grant programs where you can say, I want to go someplace new. That usually doesn't work when we're applying for grants. We actually have to have a lot of connections ahead of time, but it was okay for the Fulbright. So I had criteria where I wanted to look at a country that had a disability rights movement and organizations of groups that are run by people with disabilities, and also had social work as a discipline. That right now, they're narrowed it down quite a bit. Truthfully, was looking for someplace warm because I've always been going sabbatical. I didn't want to go to Siberia from Minnesota. And because you can see that a lot of them have language requirements, and you have to be able to be fluent to speak in the language. I'm only fluent in English, so that really narrowed it down to only about 10 options. And then I spent a long time looking for contacts, and I tried the Fulbright office. I looked at the scholar list, and I contacted. They didn't have a PowerPoint saying to do all of this, so I was happy I sort of did all of this. I contacted the person who'd been the Fulbright 2 years before, who responded to me, and I had my heart set on Botswana. I thought that would be perfect, and I got more and more excited, but I could not get the university to show interest in me at all. So I was like, okay, next option. Namibia's right next door. I really knew nothing about Namibia. And I contacted the head of the department and made an instant connection with the head of the department. I then went through the same thing where I contacted former Fulbright folks and stuff, but it really ended up being that connection where she said, and this is Namibian, like, oh, you're a gift from God to send you this email this day. So I was very happy about that. So when I was writing so we worked out what I would do while I was there. I was told in Namibia that because they don't have a strong research infrastructure, probably in my area, the disability organizations are rather, fly-by-night, that it made sense to do teaching research, not just a research award. And I was interested in teaching as well because I wanted to have experience teaching outside of my comfort zone. So we designed a 75%, 25% split. And I looked online at a lot of sample scholar documents. And I am a reviewer, or I was a reviewer for CIES, for the disciplinary review team, and I can see a lot of people don't do that. I really advise you to do that, to see what they're looking for, because it's different than your typical grant application. Now I think you can do that through the U. I've reviewed a lot of people's in the U as well. So I ended up going to the University of Namibia. Namibia, unlike most or a lot of countries in Africa, does not have a long intellectual tradition like Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya. The national university is only 25 years old. So there's very few supports for research. There aren't a lot of folks who are doing research there, so there's not a lot of people with PhDs there. None of my colleagues in my department had a PhD, though a lot of them were involved in consultancies through the government and international NGOs. So what I ended up doing is I was teaching 2 courses and parts of 3 or 4 more courses. I also sat on every single master's and PhD committee in the entire faculty of humanities and social services, which was I really enjoyed that a lot, and I got to meet people. I was doing it in fields I knew nothing about, communications and English and all sorts of things. My background's in political science, but the first course they asked me to teach the day after I started there was group work, which is like group therapy, which I not only know nothing about, I really know nothing about that, but I went with the attitude that I would do whatever they asked me to do. I did decline at first, like, you don't really want me to, but they wanted me to, so I did it. And I think that really, coming in with that attitude really helped a lot with me in building relationships there. I did get to teach some courses related to disability and social development and stuff that was related as well. It took me all year to figure out the system. I still don't really understand the system there because they have external examiners that fly in from South Africa, and they take the final for the test 2 semesters after they've had the course and things like that. So I never really understood all of that. It was also sort of confusing to me because you didn't really have class rooms assigned to your class. And so I spent a lot of time walking around campus with 60 students following me, peeking into classrooms to see what was available. And I think I was just doing that wrong because nobody else seemed to be doing that. But anyways, so the lack of resources was challenging for me, but for the students especially. The students couldn't afford to buy books. They'd have to wait in line 2 hours for the computer lab, and they'd only be able to use it for an hour, but they had to type their papers out, and they didn't have computers. I didn't have electricity in my office for months, or a phone in my office. I never did get a computer connection or Wi-Fi, but that was all okay. Let's see. I don't want to take up too much time. I'm gonna sort of skip ahead to the research, but just a little bit about the teaching. I found that was really useful for me for bringing back. I didn't change my teaching style much. I taught my American style where I asked questions and made them get into groups. And I heard later they went and complained to me to the director of the department that I was making them think in class. And they didn't like it, and that my English was really poor. So I get it because of my accent. So it's really horrible English-speaking professor. So I thought that was funny, but by the end they were giving me presents, and I'm still in contact with a lot of students, and I've mentored some students and actually brought one of their lecturers here to be a doctoral student. She just defended her dissertation last summer, so that was exciting for me. And my colleagues were amazing as teachers. They had huge course loads. They taught 8 or more classes a semester, a year, and they also, filled the toner on the printer and all of that kind of stuff too. There was no support at all. So for about the research, I came with my own project, but as soon as I got there, I told my colleagues I'd be happy to help them with anything. And and they didn't have a lot of research support, so I went in there with that attitude that I would help them. And I started off mostly just giving them little technical assistance and editing, and very quickly I became collaborators on a lot of their projects as well. And that was actually turned out to be much more rewarding than my own research, because I was helping people who really had these research interests, but they hadn't had a lot of training and didn't have a lot of experience to do what they wanted to do. So I get to be involved in all sorts of interesting projects aside from my own, such as going into a restricted diamond mine to do research on HIV and substance abuse among the people who were living in this diamond mine. I had to get a letter from the Ramsey County Sheriff to get my special visa to get into this mine. It was very, very cool and very interesting. I also worked with a lot of NGOs providing technical assistance on program evaluation and stuff like that. So I just went in there really excited to be away from my job here and being able to do whatever I could to be useful. My own project fell apart when I got there because the head of the NGO, I got left under suspicious circumstances, and there was a new person in there who didn't like anything that had gone on before. And so I really had to scramble and ended up doing my project outside of that NGO. So it all worked out okay at the end, but I really was glad I was flexible in this matter, or I would have been devastated. And if it had been just a research grant, I would have been super devastated about it. But it ended up okay at the end. So I think just sort of my thoughts about building ongoing collaborations. We had a Fulbright orientation at the time for new folks going to sub-Saharan Africa, And they talked a lot about being a cultural ambassador, and I sort of thought about that, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna think about this as an opportunity to be a cultural ambassador as well as a researcher. And people who went to Namibia the same time as I did, some people took the researcher part first and some took the cultural ambassador part first. And I'm really happy that I thought about this before I went, because I worked on developing relationships with my colleagues and some NGOs that I still have today. So this is, 6 years ago. And since I've, while I was there, I collaborated with a lot of folks. I published with 4 or 5 people the first paper they'd ever published in a research journal, which helped a couple of people get promotions, which was pretty exciting to me. I have now stayed an ex officio member of their national organization, the Namibian Association of Social Workers. I've been invited back to give keynotes at different events there. I've stayed in contact with a number of students there. I brought our students to Namibia, so a couple years, maybe 4 years ago, I brought a group of our master's students to Namibia for a 3-week trip, which was really a great trip because we got to use all these connections we had, so it wasn't this, arranged by one of those travel tour companies, but we actually went around and met folks. And then we've recently, based on this Fulbright, signed an MOU with the University of Namibia and the University of Minnesota to do an ongoing scholarly exchange. And I brought the first group of master's students to do a 500-hour MSW placement there last summer, and that went really well. And as long as the visa situation works out, I should be picking up our first 2 Namibian scholars who are faculty members who are going to be coming here next week to be visiting scholars here. So I'm really excited about that. And I continue to do research with faculty there as well, some helping their research, so I've been helping them with their dissertations and things like that. And then I'm also just completing an IRB on a new project related to parents with disabilities, which is my research topic that we're going to be doing an international collaboration there. So anyways, I'm very grateful to the Fulbright program. It was a great opportunity for myself and my family. I brought my daughters, who are 4, 7, and 9, with me. I can answer questions about that as well, or anything about writing your application or anything else. So thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Jeannine is going to take us to another part of it.
Put together a few slides to figure out how to navigate here. So I was a Fulbright scholar in Mexico in the spring semester of 2011. So I did a 6-month Fulbright, but it was a year sabbatical. So I had started the year so it was the 2010-2011 year. It was 75% research, 25% teaching, and the teaching was actually a distributed graduate seminar in sustainability science, which I had developed in the US through the Institute on Environment and the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And this gave me the opportunity to then bring Mexico into that. So I should mention I'm in the College of Biological Sciences and the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior. I'm a plant biologist. I study the ecology and evolution of plants. And so the teaching part I actually did in the fall before I went. And then when I was there, I was focused on research. And that teaching has continued on to this day. So I'll just show you a few slides and some of the challenges. So one thing so I brought my kids. I had 2 kids. They were 11 and 5 at the time, 10 and 5 at the time. And on the very first day of geography, my daughter comes home and informs me that Mexico used to be a lot bigger than it is now. And here's a map before the US-Mexican War, and it's worth knowing that in elementary school, every Mexican is taught that they used to be a lot bigger than they are now, and it's pretty much our fault. So we're dealing with a neighboring country that has a history of resentment towards their northern neighbor, and we've got these border issues which have all kinds of social, political problems associated with them, which leads to further difficulty between these two neighboring countries. And so while we have these political borders that make things politically complicated, if you're really interested in the biology, the biological organisms don't have these borders. And so if you're really interested in understanding the evolutionary history and the biogeography of organisms that have for millennia moved across this continent, it's really important to get beyond that border. And how do you do that given we're humans that have to work in a social context, and in order to get across those borders and have a long-term research program that's able to do that, we have to actually navigate the political and social dimension of this. So it's worth knowing that when I ask my Mexican colleagues, what's the one thing you want US scientists to know about Mexico and science in Mexico, I get various answers, but one of them is Mexico is mega diverse. It has a lot of biodiversity and a lot of cultural diversity. So they have these riches that scientists in the US would very much like to take advantage of, which sets up the possibility that Mexican scientists are skeptical of what we might call scientific colonialism, where scientists go down there to study the biological riches down there and then come back and publish it. And the Mexican scientists are not given appropriate credit for that. And there's a long history of that in the fields of archaeology in Latin America. And so I was very conscious of this. And so my main reason for doing the Fulbright was to build trust, build long-term relationships, and to build a mutual purpose with understanding between our cultures so that we could work together over a long period of time to answer fundamental biological questions that require moving across borders. And just to give you an example of how these borders don't matter for biological systems, here are the monarch butterflies that have gotten a lot of press because their populations are declining. But when I was there, it was a fantastic year for these monarchs, and we went and visited them 3 different times. And these have these migration routes up through Minnesota, where people like Karen Oberhauser are studying them in collaboration with scientists at the institution I was at, which was at the National University in Mexico, UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, and at their ecology, their Centro de Investigaciones en Ecosistemas. And Karen actually has collaborations with folks there, and I have long-term collaborations with folks there, in large part because of this Fulbright. I should mention, okay, I'll come back to that, but one thing that's also worth noting on this idea of scientific colonialism is another thing I learned by having my kids in school there was that they really have, Mexicans have an identity that is very deep in time. They have a sense of place that's very deep in time because they're at a place that has these ancient civilizations and cultures that they're all taught about that they see as part of their own history and identity. And when I look back on my education and history in the United States, it goes back a couple hundred years. If you want to go farther than that, you study European history. We spend very little time educating ourselves about the history of the people who were here before Europeans came. Our identity is not steeped in deep time in this place, and that's very different than in Mexico. And it influences how they see themselves, how they see US Americans. They have a lot of pride. They they really don't want to be taken advantage of. So this is just one thing I mention, is they think of us as sometimes as these newly come Europeans that are now coming down to exploit Mexico in whatever way they can. And so that's just another hurdle to keep in mind when working with colleagues there. So I was at UNAM, their national university, and I was they have various campuses of the national university, and what they've tried to do is to get people out of Mexico City, so that's where the main campus is, but they've tried to establish centers of excellence in different disciplines in other regions of the country. So for ecology and evolution, Morelia in Michoacan they have the Center of Ecology there. So many of the best ecologists in the country are centered in Morelia, which is where I was. And this is a slide from a colleague of mine. This is a former postdoc in my lab who was my host when I was there. So we've been working together for a long time. He was a postdoc in my lab before I went there. So unlike your situation, I did have contacts there already because this is the primary center for ecological research in Mexico. And I had 3 different sets of colleagues at that same institution from many years of just being in the same ecological community. So this is a slide from Antonio, and he's given talks on similar subjects in Mexico. So he had this slide comparing socioeconomics in the US and Mexico. So we have a bigger country, we have higher population, we have much higher GDP, and in terms of the investment in scientific and technological research, Mexico is only 1% of the US. And then he's calculated researchers per 1,000 inhabitants. Mexico's 7% of the US. So the situation is that they have world-class scientists and expertise, but they have many fewer of them. And so while we might have a major research university in every state, or several of them, they'll have maybe one equivalent research institution for that discipline. So they have the capacity and the expertise. It's not the case in Namibia where you don't have PhDs and you don't have well-trained people. You have highly trained, highly skilled people. You just have many fewer of them. And here is a graph that shows the uneven distribution of resources in Mexico across institutions. And UNAM, the national university, is almost 25% of all the resources gets almost 25% of all the science resources in Mexico. So this is really, their national university is really where most of the scientific work is happening. And this shows comparing the United States and Mexico, how much of global scientific publications are produced by the United States versus Mexico. So the U.S. produces about a third of all of the scientific publications globally, whereas Mexico, it's less than 1%. So we have a situation where you have a lot of expertise, high capacity, really well-trained people, but few of them and many fewer resources, much lower ability to contribute globally. So that means that developing a common purpose where we can help in a way that expands their capacity and takes advantage of the intellectual resources they already have to investigate the biological riches that they have is a winning strategy. This is just showing that there's been a remarkable increase in the development of the scientific community over the last number of years. This publication came out in 2006, so I don't have the later years, but what was astounding was that the Ecological Society of Mexico meeting that I went to when I was there had 3,000 young people. So 3,000 graduate students and undergraduates were at this meeting. Given that in the 1960s there was one ecologist in the country, this is a phenomenal increase in the development of a scientific establishment, and specifically in ecology. And so that appears in total numbers of ecology papers per year. Mexico is shown there in the light blue. This is also a trend that's happening in other Latin American countries. And the number of Mexico-US collaborations is rapidly increasing as well. So if we can do this right, there's a lot of opportunity for mutual benefit. So I wanted to go down and study these endangered oak species that occurred in southern Baja in the middle of the desert. How do you get there? Do you really want to go by yourself? I didn't want to. I'd much rather go with a partner. This is my colleague Tonio. We did a lot of traveling around the country together. That way there's less concern about all the crazy things you hear in the newspaper. It actually isn't on the ground like what you read about in the newspaper at all, but it is much better to go with people who know what they're doing. So I always traveled with colleagues. We spent a lot of time out in the mountains collecting species. And the really wonderful thing is that because of that data we were able to collect, we were able to get a National Science Foundation grant to develop a collaborative project with our Mexican colleagues and give them a subcontract. So now we're funneling money to them so that we can do this work collaboratively. So that's a very positive outcome of having spent 6 months there building relationships, building trust, developing a mutual purpose, so that now we can work together over a long period of time. Another thing that's been really successful is this Sustainability Science Distributed Graduate Seminar, which we're still doing. We teach this now every 2 years together with Mexico, Arizona State, and this year, so let me just show you this. This has been really sponsored by the Institute on Environment. We've been really grateful for their support on this. This is at the Institute on Environment. Here we have Dave Tillman and John Foley participating in one of the weekly seminars. And we developed a curriculum together with the Mexicans. This is the UNAM campus in Morelia. These are my Mexican collaborators. This is how we collaborate together via video technology. We have a website that's actually hosted by the University of Minnesota. Arizona State does the video. We're using their video technology. And we all go online together. And we have debate, we have argument, we have disagreement. And this has been really fruitful in developing research priorities. And this year, for the first time, we're having Sao Paulo now participate in this. So we're really trying to balance out American and Latin American institutions. Originally, we had 6 US institutions. Now we've pared it down to 2 US institutions and 2 Latin American institutions. 4 seems to be a pretty good number. It's everybody gets to participate and contribute to the discussion. And then this is a special feature in Ecology and Society that's come out of this distributed graduate seminar, and it's really representing a partnership between my Mexican colleague Patricia Ballenera in UNAM and Steve Pulaski in Applied Economics here and myself, and then a colleague who works in Kenya in East Africa. And these papers, half the papers in this special feature are written by students who took the course. They're fantastic papers representing countries throughout Latin America, East Africa, and the United States. And this is, it's all in press and in review right now, about to come out. And this is a product that's directly attributed to that Fulbright experience and to this ongoing seminar that was facilitated by spending time there and developing these long-term relationships, trust, ability to take on the perspective of your colleagues, see things from a different viewpoint. And we developed a framework for thinking about trade-offs in ecosystem services that take into account different cultural perspectives, different value systems, and that allowed us to get past some of the arguments we were having in this course about why we think different trajectories are better. Those are the slides I have together. I will just elaborate a little bit more on this last piece to explain what I mean more. So before I went to Mexico, that fall semester when I was on sabbatical, and I was in Minnesota, and UNAM was on the other end of the video screen, we started to have these debates about the best way to preserve biodiversity and develop your country for human well-being. And the Mexicans came up with one perspective and wrote, a group of really ambitious students wrote this fabulous paper about that perspective. And the Minnesota students developed these fancy mathematical models, economic models, explaining why you should basically develop large tracts of land for agriculture and leave aside large tracts of land to save biodiversity. The Mexicans had exactly the opposite perspective, where you mix agriculture and biodiversity together and people live where the biodiversity is. And the students were really angry at each other. They couldn't see how these could be compatible. They had done the math showed clearly this was a better outcome. And so that forced us to develop a whole framework that is in this special issue for thinking about how human values actually have to be taken into account when you do the math. When you do the economics, you have to take the human values into account. And so that's what we've done in this special issue. It's addressing that conflict that arose by debating and listening to each other across these cultural perspectives. So I think I'll leave it at that. I probably left out a lot of details about the how this all came to be, but it gives you some flavor for what I did. Thank you, Jeannine.
Okay, we are headed back to Abdi with Cawo. You have time.
I won't read that much. However, I'll try to be brief because I really think the conversation in terms of the questions you have will be very, very useful. My name is Abdi. Sorry.
Is it rid of this?
No, I don't have any slides, so it's okay. Yeah, my name is Abdi. I'm assistant professor of sociology at on the other side of West Bank. I spent a full year in Pretoria, University of Pretoria, South Africa in 2012, 2013, so it's very, very, very recent. Of course, it was such a, I think, prestigious, it was so fantastic to have that opportunity. My award was a research award, so it was 9 months in South Africa. I debated whether I should apply for teaching/research. As a sociologist, and especially sociologist who does migration, ethnographic work, it's very difficult to find resources in terms of money and then time off to do research. So I decided the only way I'm going to apply this and I'm going to insist is I need time to write out my project. I have had relationships, unlike our first speaker who went to Namibia, I've had relationship with research going on in South Africa prior to my Fulbright. But because I was teaching most of the year, I was taking 2 months here, 3 months here during the summers to travel and collect data. So I've been working on a book looking at Somali migration to South Africa, US, and United Arab Emirates. I'm interested in comparative research and I'm interested in how different immigration policies inform or shape the migration outcomes in terms of socioeconomic integration or not, or exclusion, in terms of racial, ethnic, religious identity, in terms of sense of belonging, in terms of citizenship, legality. So those are the questions I was looking at, and it was very much global research. I was very fortunate to have received one of the first Office of International Programs, the former what now we call it GPS. Previously it was called Office of International Programs, and there was the University of Minnesota kind of put some money into this global spotlight. So I was actually, in 2010, I was one of the first people to get that grant. And that grant allowed me to pay for the trips, but it was not giving me time off to be able to write out the data that I was collecting from these places. So it was very much a research grant, but as many of you know, when you get there, there are demands that are made on you, but also there is desire on my part to become part of the department. So even though I did not teach my own courses, I did different modules. So for example, one of my colleagues was teaching a 7-week course, and I took over 3 of the 7 weeks, and I did a migration module. So, it's a globalization course. I also gave many guest lectures. I did seminars. More than that, I did a lot of mentoring. University of Pretoria, I think again, unlike Namibia, South Africa has very strong higher education institutions. But these are coming out of the apartheid structure. So a lot of these universities were highly segregated. University of Pretoria was an Afrikaans language university. Blacks did not have, or anybody of color did not have ability to apply to the school or to get into the school. And now the whole system is changing very rapidly. But of course, as you can imagine, now students from the townships, from poorer areas of South Africa are coming to these universities, and sometimes they're not as ready as they can be. Just like some of the things we struggle in terms of immigrant students or first-generation students. So there has to be a lot of effort that's put in terms of mentorship. So it was great to be part of that. And there are, by the way, the head of the sociology department, who actually turned 65 today, and you have to retire at 65. And I just spoke with her before I came here. I Skyped with her. Her name is Jeannine. I actually invited her to give a talk at ICGC last year, so she came to our university, and I'm glad to hear all of us now have this connection with the institutions where we did research. We have a PhD student in our department who also came from University of Pretoria, and he's now almost actually finishing soon. We have another student from University of Pretoria, Sociology, who just got accepted to the Geography department, and she deferred, but she'll be coming back next year. So that relationship that I've developed and that I continue to develop is definitely very much a long-term relationship. I was also able to put in a collaborative, I guess a little bit of money into my global spotlight for collaborative project with South African colleagues, and we're working on that. It's early stages, but South Africa, and I work on migration, there has been a lot of tensions between migrants and refugees in South Africa, with poor black South African areas and townships. Migrants who go in and start small businesses have confronted a lot of hostility, a lot of, some people call it xenophobia. I won't go that far, but there has been a lot of violence against migrants. And the new project that I would like to do with my colleagues at the University of Pretoria involves the experience of international African students, and I'm talking about non-South African students coming from the rest of the continent and their experience in higher education in South Africa. So in many ways I've been, in terms of mentorship, but the mentorship was not only one way. It's not, only, I was mentoring students, but I also was getting a lot of mentoring from senior colleagues in the sociology department. I was doing research in South Africa. Of course, South Africa has a long history of racial tensions, political. So a lot, my book, by the way, I just finished it. It's accepted by University of Minnesota Press. It's coming mid-year next year. But James Horoblar, who was the head of the department, has read most of my chapters and has given me in-depth feedback and commentary on my work. Because even though I have spent a lot of time in South Africa, I will never know South Africa the way she knows it. She has been involved in the both as an academic but also as an activist with the ANC. So it's someone who has been really, has been instrumental, I guess, in terms of the struggle against apartheid, etc. Just a couple of things. So in terms of, so the collaborations, I think that's very important to mention. But also the students, when I was conducting my own research, I was going to the townships, informal settlements. And even though you can look at me and I come from the African continent, the Horn of Africa, I'm very much a foreigner. I do not speak except for the English, South Africa has 11 official languages. And I speak one of those, which is English. So many of the grad students at the University of Pretoria were also, some of them I hired as research assistants, and they were very important in getting me to visit some of the townships, so going with them, so that I was interviewing Somali and Ethiopian business men who live now in the townships and who work in the townships, and then looking at their livelihood opportunities, their relationships with local populations, the natives, etc. When I was in South Africa, I also had the opportunity to serve on the embassy Fulbright selection committee, and I served on both the senior scholar selection committee, which was fascinating and actually wonderful in terms of, again, unlike Namibia, there is amazing pool of emerging scholars and senior scholars, and these include young Black South Africans who are coming of the townships, who are now, really the future of the academia in South Africa. So I was both in the senior, senior scholars who are coming to the US, but on another one, I served on the grad students and student, selection committee, and that was really eye-opening. It was a fantastic experience to have. What else can I say? A couple of things. I traveled with my whole family. I have 2 children. When my daughter was 4 years old, and my son was 6. So both of them actually went to a full-year school in South Africa. It was quite an experience. I was telling a couple of people this morning that my daughter now has 3 racial groupings. So she calls anyone who's brown, she calls them colored. And then she calls some people black if their skin is kind of darker. And now she's 6. She just started grade 1. She goes to Burroughs in southwest Minneapolis. But she still has that, because last year she spent in South Africa. And I'm thinking that it will probably fall off, and the black-white dichotomy, narrower one that we have here. I don't like any of them, by the way, nor the South African one, nor the US one. But it tells you that that she was being socialized into that racialization scheme that persists in South Africa. Just a couple of things. It was a fantastic experience overall. But South Africa is a very difficult and interesting place. It's a place that now is far removed from apartheid by 20 years. 1994 is the collapse of apartheid. We're in 2004. But in terms of divisions, in terms of segregation, in terms of inequality, it is still, the divisions do persist. So we lived in University of Pretoria housing, where you have a guard every 3 minutes. So there is this sense that you live in a very insecure place. That is definitely not something I like. It's something that's unsettling, when you live in Minnesota. Also, when you go out, when you go to the malls, maybe 90% of the people you see are white South Africans. And I'm talking about, honestly, in Pretoria, the areas where the university is. So it's highly segregated. And then, as someone who was interested in migration and the relationship between migrants and South African natives, it was interesting to see that within the citizens of South Africa, the divisions and the tensions that continue to persist, and that will hopefully change with time, but that we're far, far from. So it was a fascinating place to be in terms of what I've learned, what my children have learned, but it's also a very difficult place to be in terms of the tensions that you feel, the racialization and the extreme inequality. But it's definitely an amazing place to learn and to see how society in transition in terms of the educational institutions, in terms of media, so it was a fantastic experience to have. And I think that is all I'm going to say, and hopefully I'm sure I left a million things, but to give you an overall of my experience, and maybe in the question answer session, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to Liz, to Jeannine, and to Cawo. I think they've given you a perspective that you can pursue the topic that fits your background and experience. You can go to a new place, or you can build relationships based on foundations you have set here. Minnesota, that was a great example of having a postdoc and then having a contact at a university and doing work with a global spotlight that then leads to a longer living experience abroad. So let's open it up for questions for any of the speakers. What's on your mind? Yes.
Well, I'll bring a couple of questions for folks, and they might be sort of, a couple of them geared toward to you.
That's fine.
Is there any opportunity for spouses to apply, spouses who are both academics, to apply together? That would be the first question.
Oh, great question. Yes, indeed, and we have had that. Two people can apply to the same award or the same country or to different countries. We had a husband and wife who applied, one to Cameroon in the sciences and one to Mexico in the arts, and they both got grants. Didn't make any difference to us. They had different last names, but either way, he went fall semester, she went with him, and her grant was spring semester, and he went with her. So it's a merit review. You know, each application is going to be judged on its own for the place of application and what you're proposing to do, but there's no disadvantage or advantage in the process. So if you both wanted to be located in the same country on a grant at the same time, you would want to look for a program that offers more than one grant. So for example, some of the African countries, there may only be one teaching or teaching research grant, but your spouse could apply to the African Regional Research Program in the same country. You know, in a place like Mexico that might have 20 grants, you know,
There was a
we could
couple,
do
there
that.
was a pair that was part of the Mexican Fulbright at the same year I was, so that they both had gotten them.
Okay.
So if you were both applying, you wouldn't both be writing about doing the same project together, unless, you know, your projects really could stand on their own if only one were funded, because it is possible that both would be funded one or none.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Another question.
Yeah, all right, I'll ask one more and then I'll let others. So is there any, I don't want to say age bias, but if you have an older faculty member who is either close to retirement or wants to apply as part of their, you know, moving into retirement, what's, you know, what do you have to say about that?
Good question. Yeah, look at the award. Make sure that it fits, you know, what the scholar would be doing and what the ongoing results might be. So if someone is still active in scholarship or active in teaching, mentoring, curriculum, they want to speak to that. What will the results of the grant be? And I would say beware in a Fulbright that it's not all about you. I was glad that Liz mentioned the cultural ambassador component. So even if you're proposing to go and do research that's going to result in a book, it's not all about you and the library and the book publication. It's about those relationships too, so you need to speak to that. But yes, the program is open at all levels of scholars, including scholars emeritus.
Okay, I can say, from being on the review, I don't know, disciplinary review
Yes.
panel, I guess, I noticed that some of the senior folks would talk about how great they were, you know, and I mean they didn't get rated highly by the reviewers. And there were other senior folks who talked about this opportunity to share their knowledge, and they were. So, I think we're trained to write grants that talk, you know, I'm so great, my research is so great, you know, and that it really falls flat in the Fulbright review panels.
That's a great way to put it, so that the humility and the openness to learning, and not that it's a one-way street of
Yeah. But I would think a lot of places would love to have a senior scholar come in. I would think that people would love.
Yeah, especially if they're building a graduate program,
Right.
and someone's bringing a career worth of experience in developing a curriculum and has a way to apply that. But they do want to speak to what will happen after grad too. Are they still engaged with graduate students, with the institution in some capacity, or in their consulting? Yeah. Another question.
What in general are the selection criteria
For the scholars?
for the scholars?
Yes, so you'll find the criteria on the website, so it's meant to be a transparent process. So the criteria will be depending what you propose to do, teaching, research, or both. For the teaching, you're going to be submitting sample syllabi. So these can be based on what you teach here. If you can, I would say adapt them for the local audience and don't just photocopy them. And please don't send all the pages about plagiarism or policies of the university. That doesn't tell us a lot about your teaching style or about your adaptability. So, look more at the content. It's going to be currency in your field. It's going to be productivity and scholarship in relation to your time in academia and the type of institution where you are in your discipline. Because scholarly productivity looks different in sculpture than it does in law, than it does in chemistry. And Liz is referring to what we call discipline review. In terms of stages of the review process, when the application comes in, we check it for eligibility and completeness, and then we send it to discipline reviewers. So Liz would have been reading in social work whether the application was for Albania or Algeria or Argentina. And would be giving comments on what I'm saying, the quality of the scholarship and the teaching from that knowledgeable perspective from the discipline, because they'll know the CV, the bibliography, what you're referring to. And then those comments go to the regional reviewers who are going to read all the applications for Argentina or Albania or Algeria and other parts of the Middle East. And they will have lived there, worked there, most likely had Fulbright there. So they're going to be thinking more about the local context and the feasibility, going to look at methodology. They're going to consider the adaptability and how that comes through in the letters of reference and in the project statement itself. Let's see. And then they're going to look at the potential impact. So you want to address that, whether it's the teaching or the research. What are you going to do with the knowledge you gain from teaching? Might there be a way to incorporate that in classes here, as was done brilliantly by Jeannine in really developing a course that's engaging students in both places? Or are you going to bring back any new authors into the curriculum? What are you going to do there? So those are the basics. Does that make sense?
So I actually wrote down 3 bullet points. So I've done 2 Fulbright. The other one was as a student in Germany a long time ago. And then I've also served on the review committees for students here at the U. And 3 things come to mind immediately. So one is the proposal really needs to fill a gap in knowledge. There has to be some reason why you need to go to this country to do something that you couldn't do sitting here. You need to have a really clear plan. You have to have done the work to figure out what you're going to be doing there and know enough about the place to know that you can actually do those things. And then I think also you need to know how you are advancing the efforts of the people there, and you have to make sure they really want you. It's really important to have spent enough time communicating with the partner institution to make sure you're helping them and that it's really going to be a beneficial experience for them.
A couple things I was thinking as you were talking. One is that the scope fits the timeline, and we saw, and some of it would be too much. You're proposing something that was just impossible to do. I recall one where they didn't speak Spanish, but they wanted to go to Mexico and do like 500 in-depth interviews in Spanish or something like that, and ethnographic research methods or something. I thought impossible. Another where they wanted to go for a whole year and teach 1 8-week class. They're both examples of you gotta fit the.
like to add is that this is very, very competitive. So sometimes, honestly, your file can be great and you might still not get it.
Right.
The first time I applied, and I got it the second time. So the first time I applied, I passed the first stage, and then the second stage I did not pass. And having been on graduate committees and some in the Fulbright scholar committee in South Africa, honestly, at the end we had to select 20 people out of 50 great, and I'm talking about the 50 is reduced from a few hundred. So what I mean is that if you apply once and you don't get it, it doesn't necessarily mean that your file is not good, but sometimes it just means that we need to picky at times. So apply again. That's really for me what I believe. Like you don't give up. Apply the second time and apply the third time, and definitely you will eventually get it.
And to finish the discussion on the review process, we talked about the U.S. review, which is the merit review. But then, as you say, it goes on to the host country, where I call it more of a fit and balance review. They've already got a meritorious pool, and it's probably more than they'll be able to fund. So they're doing what you mentioned. They're thinking about placement and spreading out the resources. So grants in the capital city, grants in other parts of the country, across the disciplines, and they're balancing that with the Fulbrighters coming from their country to the U.S., the students, the teachers, all the pieces.
So for the politics, I sat on that committee too, and it was, well, this department got it this year. That's,
It doesn't have anything to do with your
so we can't give it to them again, so I had nothing to do with that part.
Yes.
Could somebody comment on the Fulbrights for the health sciences? And then what is the level of support for faculty? I mean, do you get paid while you're away? Kind of what is the support? And then what's an application look like? How long is it? What are the components that go into it?
Sure. Okay, so applications in the health sciences to start nursing, medical science, public health, numerous grants every year. Other things that I missed?
No, that's it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So it doesn't have to be a PhD, it can be an MD, doctorate of public health. Definitely those are in demand and of interest around the world. In terms of what an application looks like, it's a very doable process. It's less daunting than an institutional application. I'll let the applicant first talk to that a little bit.
It's a five-page limit to try and doing teaching and research, laying out your whole plan. So it's mostly trying to fit it all in succinctly, and then also talking about what you're doing and what you're going to bring. And that was, you can write it fast. It's the planning behind it that's the.
Yeah, and I would say it should be written in a way that somebody in a very different discipline can understand. I mean, it's going to be well-educated people reading the proposal, but they may be in an entirely different discipline, and they have to get what's really exciting about what you're doing and get why it's important, why it's going to have an impact, why the other country will benefit from having you there.
I would really suggest looking at a lot of these. You can find them around, just from people who are here, because they are very different than writing an NIH proposal. You're talking about why them?
Yeah, three of us here. I'm happy to send
the
application to anyone.
They're different, but it's not a hard application.
So it's an online form, and then you attach this 5-page project statement, up to 3 pages of bibliography if your application includes research, up to 10 pages of syllabi if your application includes teaching, a letter of reference if you have one from the institution, and particularly if it's required for the award, and then in the online application you're listing 3 people who would serve as references and who would write a letter of reference for you. If you're applying for teaching, one should be a person here who has access to your teaching evaluations and can speak to the quality of your teaching. A second reference could also be from University of Minnesota, but you would want one of the 3 to be from outside this institution, someone with whom you've collaborated. It can be someone in the U.S. or outside, someone with whom you've taught before.
So wait, I have two follow-ups on the question. I'm remembering now that for proposals in the sciences, which I assume health sciences,
same thing. You can submit a technical appendix, which I did. So I wrote my 5-page proposal in very straightforward language that anybody could read. But then I had a rather lengthy appendix that gave an excruciating scientific detail which molecules I was going to be extracting and how I was going to do the technical details of the work so that there was no question that it was a legitimate scientific endeavor. And I don't know what the page limit on is that, but that's
actually
maybe
not a
nobody will read
requirement.
that. I don't know, maybe a scientist
Not
who
something
gives
that's
somebody in your field who gives the proposal can then look at that and say, oh, okay, they know what they're talking about.
No, that's really not part of the.
And then the
process.
I'll say one more thing. So then the syllabus, one thing I did with my syllabus before I included it in the proposal was I sent it to my colleagues and I said, does this syllabus make sense? What would you change about this? And I had 3 different colleagues from that institution comment on the syllabus and edit it before I included it.
And yes, you do get paid,
Yes.
depending on the.
What is the grant? The grant is funding in about 80 countries around the world. The program is administered through the public affairs section of the U.S. Embassy in the country. So that's the case in Namibia and in South Africa. In 49 countries around the world, the program is administered by a Fulbright Commission that was established by a treaty between the 2 governments. And in that case, the funds from the Congress go to the State Department and then to the Commission. And they administer the grant in local currency. So they make the payments. So that's the case in Mexico. If it's through the embassy, the grant funds come to our office and we write the grant in dollars and make the payments quarterly. So you have to read the catalog because the amount of money in the grant depends on where you're going and the cost of living there. In the 80 countries where the funds come to our office, there are set rates for assistant, professor, associate, and above, and for distinguished chairs in terms of a monthly stipend. Then there is a travel allowance for the air ticket, the excess baggage, and the relocation allowances. There's a living allowance. There may be a housing allowance, or in some countries, housing is provided by the hosting university. In some countries, there's an educational allowance for the tuition in kindergarten through 12th grade or first grade through 12th grade for accompanying children. Some countries have an allowance for the air travel for accompanying family up to 2 family members. If it is a research grant, there may be a research allowance. If it is a teaching or a teaching research grant, there will be what we call a book allowance, which is for the educational materials to teach the classes, whether it's several copies of a book to keep on reserve in the library or course packs. These are materials that are going to be left at the host institution. So those are some of the allowance components. If you look at a commission country, they may just say this is a flat monthly rate, like an all-inclusive rate that they'll give. So the commissions in Europe will be paying in euros, and so you want to sit down with your office here and do that, and then you want to think about, well, am I applying for a sabbatical? Is my department going to top up in any way? You know, what's true for me on this campus? Would anyone here like to speak to that further?
My experience was that I brought 3 kids with me. The Fulbright office only likes you to have 2 kids, so they had 1 too many, so I didn't send my youngest to kindergarten when she should have gone because it was too expensive. But I found that aside from that kindergarten issue, with my sabbatical, half sabbatical paid, and my Fulbright, I had more money than I would have here by far. And then I rented out my house. I suppose if I was paying my mortgage, I wouldn't. But I thought it was very generous. But I think they pay better in Southern Africa than they might in Europe.
And I was away for a year. I didn't have sabbatical, but also that year there was no retirement contribution from the university for me. But when I came back, I applied and it was done contractually. So you also get your,
If you're on sabbatical, they pay your health insurance.
And the other thing is that, for those of you who want to know, if you're out of the country for a full year almost. Yes, that's what I did. Basically, yeah, the money that, my Fulbright was tax-free at the end. Because otherwise it would have been too much, because we rented the house and that would have come to us income, yeah. So there are a few things, and the Fulbright people are very
And
good.
if you don't have a sabbatical, I mean, sabbatical, you can apply for the extra third that the university will give, but they're not gonna give it to you if you have a Fulbright. Because they're giving it to you if you don't have pay, so I can't imagine you would get the sabbatical supplement.
Well, actually, I did, so I did the budget, and I figured out.
Thank you all. I know we're at our time for the session. We'll stay for individual questions.